My name is Clara Whitman. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life I thought love was something you earned by being useful. I wasn't married, I didn't have children, but I did everything else right, or so I believed. I ran a small but successful freelance tech consulting business out of Boston, one I'd built from the ground up. It paid well enough that I never hesitated when someone I loved needed help, or at least when the people I thought loved me asked for it. Family is supposed to be your safe place. That's what everyone says. The people who know you best, who love you without conditions. But no one ever warns you what happens when you grow up in a family where love is measured by how much you're willing to give and how little you ask in return. My older sister Danielle Whitman was 2 years ahead of me in age and light years ahead in entitlement. Growing up, she always carried herself like the lead character in a movie the rest of us were lucky to appear in. Everything revolved around her moods, her needs, her milestones. She learned early that the world bent when she pushed, and she never stopped pushing. Danielle married young in her early 20s to a man named Richard Whitman. Richard was fine, pleasant, forgettable. The kind of man who built his personality around agreeing with my sister. They had 2 kids together. Ava, the oldest, was 13 now, sharp-tongued, observant, already wearing confidence like armor. And Mia, the younger one, quieter, easier to overlook. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't have admitted this a year ago, but Ava was already becoming a reflection of her mother in ways that made me uncomfortable. Not loud cruelty, just the kind that smiled while it cut. Our parents didn't exactly help. My mother specialized in passive aggression, the kind that came wrapped in sighs and guilt instead of words. My father emotionally checked out around the time I turned 10 and never really checked back in. Love in our house was inconsistent. Attention was conditional. Danielle adapted by demanding. I adapted by fixing. I became the one who remembered birthdays, the one who showed up early, the one who paid for dinner just because. I sent thoughtful gifts, offered help before anyone asked, filled in the gaps, so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I thought that was kindness. I didn't realize I was training them. No one told me that overgiving doesn't make people love you more. It just teaches them what they can take. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. Money came and went. I was doing well, and family was family right. That belief held for years until it didn't. The unraveling didn't start with shouting or betrayal. It started quietly disguised as gratitude. A couple of years ago, Richard lost his job. Danielle called me in tears, voice shaking, talking about the mortgage, the kids, the panic of it all. I transferred the money without hesitation. 3 months of payments, no contract, no expectations, just help. That was supposed to be the end of it. It wasn't. What should have been a one-time favor turned into a pattern so subtle I didn't see it forming. Utilities, school supplies, just until we're caught up. Streaming services, online subscriptions, shared accounts that somehow stayed under my name long after the need passed. I told myself it was temporary, that things would balance out eventually. They never did. There were always comments too, small ones, the kind you laugh off because calling them out would make you the problem. Wow, Clara, look at you showing up on time for once. You work on your computer all day. Must be nice not having a real boss. I laughed. I always laughed. That was the price of admission into my own family. What I didn't realize then, what I was too afraid to admit, was that I wasn't being appreciated. I was being managed, quietly, efficiently, like a resource. And I would have kept playing that role if something hadn't changed. It didn't happen all at once, but the first crack appeared when I met someone who had no stake in my family dynamic and therefore no reason to lie to me about it. His name was Ethan Miller, and meeting him didn't just change my life. It exposed it. Looking back now, I can see exactly where things shifted from kindness into expectation, but at the time, it didn't feel like a turning point. It felt like responsibility, like loyalty, like being the only adult in a room full of people who had learned how to panic loudly and wait for someone else to solve things for them. After the mortgage help, the requests didn't stop. They just changed shape. First, it was utilities. Just this month, Danielle said voice sugar sweet, like she was doing me a favor by not asking for more. Then it was school supplies, private school ones, the kind that came with logos and price tags that made my stomach tighten. Then it was subscriptions, streaming services, music plans, shared shopping accounts, little conveniences that somehow never transferred back into their names once the crisis passed. At some point, I realized I was paying for Hulu, HBO, Disney Plus, Spotify Prime, and at least two others I didn't even remember signing up for. When I finally sat down and did the math, I stared at the number on my screen for a long time. Thousands of dollars a year, quietly, automatically, bleeding out in the background while everyone pretended it wasn't happening. I told myself it was fine. I told myself money wasn't the issue, and technically, it wasn't. What hurt wasn't the cost, it was the assumption. Danielle never asked anymore. She just informed me. Oh, Clara, Netflix declined. Can you check that? Hey, Spotify kicked Ava off again. Fix it when you get a second. Not please, not thank you. Just expectation, like gravity. And when I did help when I fixed things, the gratitude lasted exactly long enough for the next need to surface. Then I went right back to being invisible. Around that time, I started noticing how rarely anyone asked about my life, my work, my health, my apartment. I'd hosted more family dinners than I could count, cooked, cleaned, coordinated, but not a single one of them had ever visited my place just to see how I lived. Not once. The comments kept coming too. Danielle had perfected the art of the compliment that landed like a slap. You're so lucky you don't have kids you can afford to help us like this. Must be nice not having real responsibilities. I laughed again, because that's what I did. Then came the unpaid labor. Danielle started a side business, one of those skincare things where everyone is a CEO and no one makes money. She called me in a panic one afternoon saying she needed help setting up a home office. Just a few cables. Maybe upgrading the Wi-Fi. You're good with tech, she said, like that explained everything. I spent 4 hours under her desk rerouting wires, installing a second monitor, fixing a router she'd never bothered to learn how to use. Richard sat on the couch watching football highlights. Ava scrolled through her phone, occasionally rolling her eyes when I asked her to move her feet. No one offered me water. When I finished sweaty and stiff, Danielle clapped her hands once and said, "You're the best, Clara. Seriously, what would we do without you?" I almost asked her. I wanted to ask what would actually happen if I said no, but I didn't. Around the same time, I found out my parents had hosted a Father's Day barbecue I hadn't been invited to. I didn't hear it from them. I saw it on Instagram. My cousin had posted a photo, my dad at the grill, Danielle laughing with a drink in her hand, Richard tossing a football with Ava. The caption read, "Family time." I stared at that photo longer than I want to admit. 10 minutes later, Danielle texted me a meme. No mention of the party, no apology, nothing. When I finally brought it up to my mother a week later, she waved it off like it was nothing. "Oh, that was last minute," she said. "Danielle planned it. We didn't want to trouble you. You live across town." I live 25 minutes away. That excuse should have hurt more than it did, but by then I was already numb. I started noticing the pattern everywhere. My mom hadn't called to check on me in over a year unless she needed something for Danielle. My dad never asked how my business was doing. My birthday card came with no message. Just a signature and a $20 bill, like I was still 12. Even Ava had changed. She used to be sweet. I used to take her to the aquarium, buy her those ridiculous animal-shaped ice creams, let her sit on my shoulders at parades. Somewhere around 11, something hardened in her. The comments started, about my clothes, my job, my lifestyle. One afternoon, she asked if I could buy her a new tablet because hers was slow and I probably had extras. When I said no, because I'd just helped pay off one of their credit cards, she folded her arms and muttered, "Guess Aunt Clara's finally broke." I laughed. That laugh cost me more than I realized. Because every time I brushed something off, every time I swallowed the discomfort and told myself it wasn't worth making a scene, I was reinforcing the role they'd given me. The fixer, the backup plan, the emotional ATM. By the time I started dating Ethan seriously, the pattern was so ingrained that I didn't even think to question it. But he did. And once someone outside the system sees the cracks, it becomes impossible to unsee them yourself. The favors kept coming, the digs kept landing, and I kept convincing myself that enduring it was the price of belonging. I didn't know yet that the bill was about to come due. I met Ethan Miller at a friend's birthday party, the kind where half the guests don't know each other and spend the night hovering near the snack table pretending they're deeply invested in a conversation about craft beer. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He just listened, really listened, and that alone felt unfamiliar enough to be disarming. Ethan worked in logistics management, structured, detail-oriented, the kind of person who liked clear systems and hated chaos disguised as tradition. We started talking about work first, then travel, then books, then the strange way families can make adults feel like children again without even trying. By the end of the night, my cheeks hurt from smiling. Our relationship unfolded quietly. No fireworks, no grand gestures, just consistency. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered things I mentioned in passing. He didn't flinch when I talked about my family, but he noticed what I didn't say too. It didn't take long for him to see the pattern I'd spent my life normalizing. The first time he really clocked it was on a Sunday afternoon when we were supposed to have lunch together. We'd planned it all week. I was looking forward to it in a way that surprised me until my phone buzzed. Danielle. Hey, Clara. Do you think you could swing by later and help set up Ava's science project? She's behind, and Richard's useless with this stuff. I didn't even hesitate. I just said yes, canceled our reservation, and started putting my shoes back on. Ethan watched me from the couch, quiet. You don't have to do that, he said carefully. I laughed, already defensive. It's fine, it's just family stuff. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on me. Do they ever cancel their plans for you? The question landed heavier than I expected. I brushed it off. That's different. He didn't argue, he just filed it away. Over time, he started pointing out things gently, almost apologetically, like he was worried I'd break if he said them too loudly. How Danielle never asked how my work was going. How my parents always called with requests, never invitations. How I'd tense up every time my phone buzzed with a family group chat notification. You notice how exhausted you get after seeing them, he asked one night after we'd driven home in silence from a dinner at my parents' house. I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell him he didn't understand, that this was just how families worked. Instead, I said nothing. Because the truth was, he was right. I was exhausted, drained in a way sleep never fixed. I felt like I was constantly auditioning for approval I never quite earned. Ethan never told me to cut them off, never suggested ultimatums. He just asked questions that forced me to look at the shape of my own life. One night, as we were washing dishes together, he said something that stuck with me in a way I couldn't shake. Clara, you don't act like someone who's loved. You act like someone who's being rented. I dropped a plate. I laughed it off, of course, joked that he was being dramatic. But later, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me, the words replayed in my head on a loop. Being rented. That's what it felt like my worth expired the moment I stopped being useful. I started noticing how differently Ethan treated me. He never assumed my time belonged to him. He asked. He thanked me. When I said no, he accepted it without sulking or guilt-tripping. There was no scorekeeping, no emotional invoice waiting to be presented later. It was calm, safe, and that safety made everything else feel louder by contrast. The more I felt seen by him, the harder it became to ignore how invisible I was everywhere else. I tried to push back at first. Tried setting small boundaries, taking longer to respond to Danielle's texts, saying I was busy when she asked for help. The reactions were immediate. Confusion, irritation, passive-aggressive comments about how I'd changed. You used to be so reliable, Danielle said once, like it was a compliment and a warning wrapped in the same sentence. Ethan noticed that too. They don't miss you, he said quietly after one of those calls. They miss what you do for them. I hated how accurate that was. Still, I wasn't ready to admit it fully. I told myself I just needed to try harder, communicate better, be clearer, that there was a way to fix this without upsetting anyone. I didn't know yet that the system I was trying to repair was designed to break the moment I stopped cooperating. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or confrontation. It came with a pair of sneakers, and a sentence spoken by a 13-year-old who said out loud what everyone else had been thinking for years. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, like I'm exaggerating or being dramatic over something small. Sneakers, a pair of shoes. But sometimes the smallest things carry the heaviest weight, especially when they're loaded with years of unspoken expectations. Ava's 13th birthday was coming up, and Danielle had been planting seeds for months. She never asked directly. She never had to. She'd mentioned the shoes casually, like an afterthought slipped into conversation. Limited edition, hard to find. All the kids at school wanted them. Ava had been working so hard lately. The implication hung there heavy and unspoken. I looked them up one night after Ethan went home. The price made my jaw tighten. I closed the tab, opened it again, sighed. I told myself it was just a gift, that it wasn't about approval or obligation, that I wanted to do something nice for my niece. So I bought them. I paid extra for expedited shipping, had them wrapped professionally, even wrote a handwritten card. Not a generic message. Something thoughtful. Something personal. I wanted Ava to feel seen. I wanted her to know I cared not because I had to, but because I chose to. The birthday dinner was at my parents' house. Small, intimate, just family. The kind of setting where you're expected to play your role without question. I arrived on time, gift in hand, and brought a fruit tart from Ethan's favorite bakery, one I'd come to love too. Danielle glanced at the box and smirked. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" she said, like I'd shown up late instead of early. I smiled tightly and took a seat between my father and Ava. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking silverware and surface-level conversation. No one asked how I was doing. No one commented on the dessert. I told myself not to read into it. When it came time for gifts, Ava tore through them like it was a competition. Wrapping paper flew everywhere. Thank yous were muttered, without eye contact. Then she reached mine. For a brief second, just one, her eyes lit up when she lifted the lid. Real excitement. Pure and unfiltered. And then she looked at me. "Mom says you're just trying to buy love because no one actually loves you." The words landed clean and sharp like glass. Silence followed. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where everyone hears it and understands it and then chooses how to respond. They laughed. Not awkward laughter, not embarrassed chuckles. Real laughter. My mother covered her mouth with a napkin, shoulders shaking. Richard wheezed. Danielle grinned and said, "Ava, be nice," without any real reprimand. No apology, no correction. Just amusement. Something inside me fractured. I didn't say a word. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I stood up, pushed my chair back gently, and walked out. I don't remember driving home. I remember sitting in my car afterward, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel, like I needed it to hold me together. Ava's voice replayed in my head. The laughter. The confirmation. They weren't laughing because it was shocking. They were laughing because they agreed. I went home and did something I should have done years ago. I opened my laptop. One by one, I logged into every account I'd been paying for. Streaming services, shared shopping accounts, utilities, credit cards tied to their address. I changed passwords, removed access, canceled subscriptions, detached myself quietly, efficiently. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just stopped. That night, I found the gift receipt for the sneakers still in my coat pocket. Crumpled. Faded. I could have returned them. I didn't. Because it wasn't about the money anymore. The next morning, I packed a small black backpack. Nothing dramatic. Just essentials and something else. Something symbolic. I drove to my parents' house, left the bag on the porch, and walked away without knocking. What was inside that backpack would make sure this story didn't end the way they expected. But to understand why I did it and what came next, you have to understand something else. That dinner wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation. The quiet that followed didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy like the air before a storm that never comes. I expected anger, calls, accusations, someone demanding to know why I'd walked out without a word. Instead, there was nothing. No texts, no voicemails, no "are you okay?" That absence hurt more than I was prepared for. For the first few days, I stayed off my phone as much as possible. I returned packages that were still being auto-shipped to Danielle's address. I canceled the family music plan. The streaming services went dark one by one. I watched the notifications roll in payment confirmations, access changes, quiet endings to obligations that had once felt permanent. Still no one reached out. By day 5, I wasn't sleeping. I lay awake at night, replaying everything Ava's words, the laughter, the way Danielle had smiled like it was all a joke. The more I thought about it, the more one thing became painfully clear. That sentence didn't come from nowhere. A 13-year-old doesn't invent cruelty like that on her own. It's learned, repeated, normalized. I wasn't just the family fixer. I was the family joke. And worse, I'd helped write the script. The realization didn't come with rage. It came with shame. A slow, nauseating understanding of how many times I'd ignored my own discomfort to keep everyone else comfortable. How many favors I'd framed as generosity when they were really fear. Fear of being excluded. Fear of being unloved. Fear of becoming irrelevant. I went completely dark. No family, no group chats. I even stopped answering Ethan's calls for a while. Not because I was angry with him, but because I didn't want him to see me like this. Hollowed out. Embarrassed. Admitting how deeply I'd let myself be diminished. He kept texting anyway. Short messages, no pressure. Thinking of you. Here if you need me. I appreciated them more than I could admit. By the end of the week, the silence from my family felt louder than any confrontation ever could. They didn't miss me. They missed the access. And once that access disappeared, so did I. I spent one entire afternoon sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by old photo albums my mother had given me after cleaning out the attic the previous summer. I hadn't looked at them then. Now I did. Birthday parties where I was off to the side. School events where Danielle stood center frame. Family vacations where I held the camera, smiling but never quite seen. That was my breaking point. Not because I was alone, I'd always been good at being alone, but because I finally admitted something I'd spent years avoiding. I didn't feel loved by my family. I felt useful. There's a difference. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next few weeks blurred together. I deleted social media, turned my phone off at night. I started running in the morning slowly at first, then longer each day. Something about the physical exhaustion helped quiet the emotional noise. I listened to podcasts I used to mock about boundaries, emotional labor, dysfunctional family systems. Every episode felt like someone was finally naming things I'd lived with my entire life. I started journaling, just dumping thoughts onto paper so they wouldn't keep circling my head. By the third week, the shame softened into clarity. That's when I finally called Ethan back. We met at our usual coffee shop. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just stood up and hugged me when he saw my face. I nearly broke down right there. Over coffee, I told him everything. Not just what happened at the birthday dinner, but the years leading up to it. The patterns. The small humiliations I'd convinced myself were normal. He listened. No judgment, no "I told you so." "You don't need to disappear to heal," he said gently. "You just need to stop sacrificing yourself to people who don't see it." That was the moment something shifted. I didn't go back to my family. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just stopped. I stopped responding. I stopped explaining. I stopped fixing. And for the first time in my life, I felt something that scared me more than conflict ever had. Peace. But peace, I was about to learn, feels like provocation to people who benefited from your silence. The first time I didn't respond to Danielle's text, it felt like I was committing some unspoken crime. My phone buzzed on a Tuesday afternoon while I was working. "Hey, can you come by later and help with a school fundraiser thing?" No greeting, no context, just expectation. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down and went back to my laptop. Nothing exploded, no sirens, no guilt-induced heart attack. The world kept spinning. That alone felt revolutionary. 2 hours later, another text came through. I ignored that one too. The next day, my mother called. I let it ring. By the end of the week, the tone shifted. Confusion crept in first, then irritation. "You've been really distant lately," Danielle said in a voicemail. "If something's wrong, you should just say so instead of acting weird." Acting weird. Not "Are you okay?" Not "Did we hurt you?" Just inconvenience. Thanksgiving arrived like a test I hadn't studied for. Danielle invited me to their house potluck style. "Bring something special," she said, like I was auditioning. I almost declined. Ethan was out of town visiting his parents, and I didn't want to spend the holiday alone. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I cooked all morning. A maple-glazed turkey breast, a sweet potato casserole with caramelized pecans, dessert from a gourmet bakery downtown. It cost more than I wanted to admit. When I arrived, I noticed it immediately. My dishes were placed at the far end of the table, away from the main spread. Everyone else's food was plated, labeled, decorated. Mine looked like an afterthought. Danielle barely looked up. "Hey, you made it." Richard was nowhere in sight. Ava didn't lift her eyes from her phone. During dinner, my mother asked Danielle endless questions about her skincare business. My father bragged about Richard's networking plans. No one asked about me. At one point, Ava wrinkled her nose at my casserole. "Why is it brown and orange? That looks gross." Danielle laughed. "It's Aunt Clara's special recipe. Be nice." Be nice, never be grateful. Midway through the meal, Danielle announced she'd forgotten to buy drinks and asked if I could run out. "I'll Venmo you," she added casually. I didn't answer. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and left. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just walked out. That was when I knew I was done trying to fix things. Not because they were broken, but because they didn't want to be repaired. They wanted me compliant. After that, I skipped 2 Sunday dinners in a row. I didn't respond to group chats. I didn't show up to last-minute emergencies. And every small act of self-respect felt like rebellion. Danielle noticed. She texted a week before Christmas. "Hey, Disney Plus isn't working. Did you change something?" I stared at the message, then deleted it. Also, Ava says Spotify kicked her off. Not cool to do that without telling us. That one made me laugh. Not out loud. Just a quiet exhale of disbelief. I blocked her that night. My mother called the next morning, voice light, almost cheerful. "Honey, Danielle says something happened. Just wanted to check in." I took a deep breath. "Yeah," I said. "Something happened." A pause. "Well, we're family," she said. "We can get through anything." The confidence in that sentence made my stomach twist. "I don't think we can," I replied. not the way things have been." She sighed. "That's sad to hear," and hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I made myself tea and went back to work. And work without the constant emotional drain started to thrive. I landed new clients, rebuilt my portfolio, upgraded my home office. I finally invested time into a side project I'd shelved for years, an app designed to help freelancers track boundaries and emotional labor. I called it Anchor. Ethan supported me through all of it, helped me paint my kitchen, cooked with me, brought me a tiny bonsai tree one night, and said, "For new beginnings." I watered it every morning. But even as I rebuilt, something lingered. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted them to see. And that was when I knew the backpack wasn't just symbolic. It was the beginning. I didn't think of it as revenge at first. I told myself it was closure, a way to end things without another conversation that would only twist my words and leave me feeling smaller than when I started. The backpack was simple. Black, worn at the edges, something you wouldn't look at twice if you passed it on the street. I chose it deliberately. No drama, no theatrics. Inside, I placed the things they'd never bothered to see while they were benefiting from them. Printed receipts, account statements, login details to subscriptions that no longer worked. Not everything just enough to tell the story clearly. At the bottom, I added a single sheet of paper. One sentence written carefully, so there was no anger bleeding through the ink. "This isn't love, it's a lease, and I'm not renewing it." I zipped the bag closed and sat on my couch for a long time afterwards, staring at it like it might speak back to me. I wasn't shaking, I wasn't crying, I felt steady. That was new. 2 nights after Christmas, I drove to my parents' house. The street was quiet, decorated with leftover lights that blinked without purpose. I placed the backpack on the porch, stepped back, and left without knocking. I didn't wait to see if anyone opened the door. For days afterward, I heard nothing. Then slowly the signs appeared, not directly, but in the periphery of my life. Danielle stopped posting photos of Ava with her tablet. Richard posted a vague rant about downgrading and starting fresh. My mother shared a meme about being hurt by the people you love most. I said nothing. That silence was harder for them than any argument would have been. A few weeks later, Danielle emailed me. Not texted, emailed, like she was filing a complaint. Subject: families should stick together. The message was 3 paragraphs of concern-flavored guilt. She apologized without apologizing. Blamed Ava's age. Suggested I'd been sensitive lately. Reminded me that Mom was sad. Asked me to move on. Not once did she acknowledge the laughter, or the years of expectation, or what that sentence at the birthday table had actually revealed. I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my cousin Michelle. We'd been close growing up. She was grounded, honest, the kind of person who saw through family theater and named it for what it was. We'd lost touch after she moved away, not because of distance, but because I'd been too busy holding everyone else together. She answered on the second ring. "Clara," she said, surprised. "What did Danielle do?" I laughed. A real laugh. Relief spilling out before I could stop it. Over the next hour, I told her everything. The birthday dinner, the silence, the backpack, the boundaries. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know they've been using you for years, right?" she said finally. "I do now." "You're not alone," she replied. I walked away too. Different reasons. Same pattern. That conversation changed everything. Through Michelle, I started reconnecting with other relatives. Distant cousins, old family friends, people who had quietly stepped back years ago without explanation. The picture that emerged was unsettling and validating. Danielle had borrowed money from multiple relatives and never paid it back. My mother guilted neighbors into free labor. Richard burned professional bridges trying to pitch his latest scheme. It wasn't personal. It was systemic. And for the first time, I was seeing it from the outside. That's when I realized the backpack wasn't the end. It was the opening move. Stop! Type continue when you're ready for Part 8, The Reckoning. Part 8, The Reckoning. Once I understood this pattern, I stopped wanting a confrontation. Confrontations give people something to fight against. They turn accountability into noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted clarity. So I planned something quieter, something surgical. The first step was documentation, not emotional, not accusatory, just facts, dates, amounts, receipts. I created a clean, simple document and titled it, What You Took for Granted. I listed everything I'd paid for over the last 7 years. Mortgage help, utilities, subscriptions, school supplies, devices, emergency transfers, totals at the bottom. Just over $21,000, not counting unpaid labor or emotional bandwidth. Under the list, I added 2 sentences. You never said thank you. That's fine. You also never said sorry. That's the part I can't forgive. I printed 4 copies, one for Danielle, one for my parents, one for Richard, one for myself. The second step was timing. Danielle's birthday was coming up, 35. She was planning a small, elegant dinner downtown. I wasn't invited, not even pretend invited. That told me everything I needed to know. So I planned my own evening. Through a professional contact, I'd been invited to speak at a small freelancer workshop. Nothing glamorous, but it gave me an idea. I booked a nearby rooftop restaurant and hosted a private fireside dinner the same night. I called it Building Without Permission. I invited Ethan, Michelle, a few close friends, 2 new clients, a couple of freelancers I'd mentored, people who saw me not as a resource but as a person. While Danielle clinked glasses with people who praised her surface-level success, I talked openly about boundaries, burnout, and rebuilding a life after being emotionally overdrawn. It felt honest. The third step was leverage. Years earlier, I'd set up a prepaid fund for Ava's extracurriculars, music lessons, school trips, tech fees. Danielle had access, but the account was in my name. I dissolved it quietly and notified the school directly that future payments should go through the parents. Danielle responded to that email. Really classy, Clara, she wrote, punishing a child to make a point. I didn't reply, because I wasn't punishing anyone. I was letting go. The final step was the envelope. I wrote one last letter by hand. No blame, no anger, just truth. About spending my adult life earning love through usefulness. About finally choosing myself. About closure. I attached a small wooden keychain, bright blue, uneven letters carved into it. Ava had made it for me in 4th grade. It used to hang on my keys. I left the envelope at my parents' door the morning of Danielle's party. No name, no explanation. That night, while my family celebrated without me, I stood in a room full of people who chose me without conditions. The reckoning didn't come with fireworks. It came slowly, quietly, and once it started, it didn't stop. Consequences don't arrive like storms. They seep in. They change the temperature of a room so gradually that by the time people notice, the air is already unbreathable. 3 days after Danielle's birthday dinner, my mother sent a single message. Your letter was hurtful. Nothing else. No questions. No reflection. Just discomfort framed as injury. I didn't respond. That same week, the school contacted Michelle, not me, because Ava's extracurricular account had been closed and the balance hadn't been replaced. Danielle hadn't answered their emails. She was shocked, apparently, that the school expected her to cover the costs. She hadn't budgeted for it. Of course she hadn't. You don't budget for a safety net you assume will never disappear. Then the access started collapsing. Streaming services, music plans, shared shopping accounts, even expedited shipping Richard had been using for his side hustle vanished overnight. According to Michelle, Danielle spiraled, complaining about how petty I was, how I thought I was better than everyone now, how I was making a point instead of being family. That word again. Family. Used like a shield, a weapon, an excuse. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something quieter. Finality. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning, Ethan and I were walking through a farmer's market when my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello. There was a pause, breathing on the other end. Aunt Clara Ava's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. My chest tightened. Yeah, I'm here. I found the letter, she said. The one you left. I didn't rush her. I didn't know she continued. About the money, or the stuff you did. Mom said you were just going through something. I exhaled slowly. That sounds like her. Another pause, then quieter things feel different now. We stood in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just honest. I'm not calling to fix anything, she said finally. I just wanted to say, I get it more now. That means a lot, I replied, and it did. Before hanging up, she added almost shyly, I still have the keychain, the one I made you. So do I said. That call didn't heal everything. It didn't rewrite the past, but it mattered. Because it reminded me why I'd done this in the first place, not to punish, but to stop participating in a lie. In the months that followed, my life expanded in ways I hadn't expected. I reconnected with relatives who had quietly stepped back years ago, built friendships that didn't require emotional invoices, turned my talk from that rooftop dinner into a podcast episode about boundaries and burnout. It resonated. Messages poured in from strangers who felt seen for the first time. People who'd spent their lives being the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who paid the emotional bill. The app I'd started building, Anchor, stopped being a side project and became a mission. A place for people to track boundaries, log emotional labor, and remind themselves that love isn't transactional. Ethan stood beside me through all of it. Steady, kind, unconditional. Danielle never apologized. My parents never had an epiphany, and that's okay. I don't need closure from people who benefited from my silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't making someone pay. It's making sure they never get to rent space in your life again. I learned that being loved isn't about how much you give. It's about knowing when to stop giving to people who never deserved it. And for the first time, I chose myself.